Killian kept his grip firm, fingers locked tight as he forced her down. Rebecca hit the floor hard, knees stinging against the cold, unyielding surface. He did not let go until she was fully lowered, her balance gone. Brianna sat just feet away, the rim of a wine glass pressed against her lower lip, watching the struggle with a sharp, mocking grin. Killian pointed to the hem of the fabric near the floor, marred by dark, wet mud. "Clean it!" he commanded. The air in the room felt thin, suffocating. Rebecca reached for a damp rag lying near the baseboard, her fingers shaking so violently she nearly dropped it. She pressed the cloth into the fabric, scrubbing with desperate, uneven strokes. Tears leaked from her eyes, hitting the floorboards in rhythmic, heavy drops that punctuated the silence. Every time the rag caught on the mud, her shoulders hitched, but she did not stop. Brianna leaned forward, her eyes bright with malice, and let out a shrill, piercing laugh that bounced off the walls, drowning out the sound of Rebecca's ragged breathing. The room offered no escape, only the sharp sting of the floor and the weight of the command. Rebecca continued the motion, the rag damp and heavy in her palm. The mud smeared, then thinned, then vanished under the pressure of her trembling hand. Brianna shifted on the sofa, her gaze drifting toward the window, her laughter trailing into a rhythmic, satisfied hum. The room was heavy with the smell of floor wax and stale wine. Suddenly, the front door did not open. It slammed back against the interior wall with a crack that vibrated through the floorboards. The wood frame groaned under the impact. The air in the room shifted. Rebecca froze, her hands still pressed against the fabric. Brianna stopped mid-breath, her glass hovering halfway to her mouth. Killian turned, his grip on his surroundings loosening as he faced the doorway. Kane stepped into the light, his chest rising and falling with heavy, measured breaths. He did not look at the woman on the floor. He did not look at the one on the sofa. His eyes tracked forward, locked onto Killian with a lethal, narrow focus that ignored everything else in the room. He closed the distance, his boots striking the floor with a rhythmic, thunderous cadence that demanded total silence. Kane did not hesitate. He bridged the final 2 paces in a blur of motion, his shoulder dropping, his arm snapping out with the weight of a man pushed to his breaking point. The impact was a dull, heavy thud as his fist connected directly with the hinge of Killian's jaw. Killian's head snapped back, his eyes rolling upward before he crumpled, his frame crashing into a side table that buckled under his weight. Glass shattered across the floor. The silence that followed was broken by a sharp, jagged intake of breath. Rebecca scrambled to her feet, her hands outstretched, blocking the path between Kane and the fallen man. "Stop!" she screamed, her voice tearing at the air. She pressed her palms against her own chest, her body shaking as she looked from the wreckage of the table to Kane's face. "I deserve this. I owe him money. He can do whatever he wants to me." She stood between them, eyes wide and frantic, her words tumbling out in a rush of desperate terror. She was terrified of the consequences, terrified that any further violence would only lead to a worse end for the man she was trying to protect. Kane stood motionless, his lungs working hard, his gaze cutting through Rebecca's protests as if she were not there. He reached into his coat and produced a thick, heavy envelope. With a sharp flick of his wrist, he tossed it onto the floorboards. It landed at Killian's feet with a dull, final thud. "It is all there," Kane said, his voice low and vibrating with contained force. "Every cent she owes you. Now, get out." Killian, still dazed, scrambled toward the floor. His fingers tore at the envelope, his eyes darting between the stacks of cash and the hard set of Kane's jaw. He did not look for an apology. He did not look for a fight. He gathered the money, shoved it into his pockets, and scrambled to his feet. He turned and bolted toward the front door, his movements frantic and uncoordinated. Brianna followed close behind, pausing only for a brief moment to cast a look of pure venom at the room before disappearing into the hallway. The front door swung shut, leaving behind a sudden, absolute silence. Rebecca stood trembling in the center of the room, the weight of the last few years lifting as the latch clicked into place, signaling the end of her confinement. Weeks later, the house held only the quiet hum of a life reclaimed. Rebecca stood before a judge, her hands steady as she reached for the pen to sign the record. Beside her, Kane waited, his presence a solid anchor. They exchanged vows in a room filled with light. Across town, the air in a cramped apartment tasted of stale dust. Killian sat alone at a table, staring at a plate wiped clean of everything but grease. A stack of empty takeout boxes leaned against the wall, their edges curled and yellowed. He reached for a glass, but his fingers slipped on a film of grime. He looked toward the bedroom. The floor was buried under piles of discarded trash. There was no one to prepare a meal, no one to organize the chaos of his day. The silence in the room felt heavy, pressing against his ears. He looked at the empty kitchen and finally understood. The comfort he had once commanded had not stayed behind. It had walked out the door with the woman he had treated like a slave. Now, he sat in the wreckage of his own design, watching the shadows lengthen across the floor.